Okay, go ahead.
Though I want to
No, go
go
ahead.
back to your point, right? Because your
Yeah.
point was that like journalism is really weak. I don't think journalism is really weak. I think it is vulnerable. So right now you are looking at an absolute evolution in the way news consumers get their information.
Yeah.
But our government is also putting out altered images
Well, the
to
White House, yeah. I mean, which is
support their narrative.
amazing.
Yes.
Welcome to another edition of SOS America. I'm Charles Feldman. Thank you so much for being on this journey with us for the past several months as we have what I'd like to call a conversation about what is happening in America at this time. And it is a very interesting time, to say the least, to be living in the United States. And I think a very interesting time if you were watching this outside the country to understand or try to understand what is happening here. And in the past few months, we've talked to a wide range of people about many different topics that have to do with what's happening in the government here, what's happening with the economy here, what's happening in education here. Today, we're going to talk about what is happening with the press here, with the news media here in the United States. And to help us on this particular mission, I'm very pleased to have as our guest today, Kelly McBride. Kelly McBride is a senior vice president at the Poynter Institute, that is in St. Petersburg, Florida. It is a very renowned and very well-respected nonprofit journalism school and research organization. It helps to train journalists. It has I think, a mission also about ethics in the journalism profession. And I'm thinking as I'm saying this, why am I saying what the Poynter Institute is when Kelly can probably do a far better job at it? So, without any further hesitation, Kelly, thanks for being with us. What exactly, you explain it, what exactly does the Poynter Institute do?
We help journalists get better at their jobs and journalism companies get better at their work in service of democracy and the public that needs them.
See, you said that much better than I did. Thank you. I should always let the guest say what it is that they do. It's always much better and clearer. Um, I want to lay a foundation for the rest of this conversation by asking you to answer a question that some people in other parts of the world who might be watching this might be asking, and that is, they hear a lot about the importance in America of a free press. And in some places, they may be scratching their heads thinking, what is so important about a free press? Why do Americans constantly talk about the importance of a free press? Tell us.
Well, I mean, it is codified in our Constitution, right? The First Amendment guarantees five core freedoms, the press among them, and freedom of speech closely tied to freedom of the press. And that was foundational to our democracy. And to the extent that many people in the world believe that democracy is the best form of government, right? It is the form of government that protects human rights, that creates economic opportunity, that establishes a rule of law, and that can be fairly applied to all citizens. Those are sort of the founding principles of democracy. Our founding fathers believed that a free press was absolutely essential and that you could not have a democracy without those core freedoms of both press and speech. There's three other ones in the First Amendment as well.
Mhm.
But those two were talked about a lot.
Okay, so I think thank you. That I think lays the foundation for everything we are going to now talk about. So now that we know why a free press is so important to Americans, what is the state of the press, free press, do you think, in the year 2026?
Well, it turns out there are lots of things that can compromise the press's ability to be free, right? And so we still have a rule of law that protects the free press in the United States. It is being challenged, though, and it is being challenged because, in addition to the government just coming and shutting down your presses, right? Which is what the founding fathers imagined in the
Hmm.
United States. Um, your your financial supporters can put pressure on you. Um, Regulations that don't necessarily affect what you can publish, but affect how your business operates, whether you can merge with another business or whether you can have a license to broadcast on the public airwaves. Those can be, your ability to be free can be curtailed by regulatory authorities who are trying to regulate beyond the sort of statutory need for
Hmm.
that regulation, right? Which is usually meant to protect the public in most cases. Um, you can also, your free press can be curtailed because your owners are self-censoring, right? Because they want to curry favor with an administration. And your free press can be curtailed because your economic model is decimated and you don't have the the manpower to cover the stories that are really important. And your free press can be curtailed because the journalists themselves are afraid of other forms of prosecution, right? So it might
Hmm.
not be an attack directly on your freedom of speech or publishing, but it might be a criminal prosecution for conspiracy because of some reporting you did. So there are many, many ways that the free press can come under attack. And we are seeing in the United States many of those attacks. So it is, if you're watching from outside the United States and you're wondering if the free press is really under attack in the United States, I think most journalists would say 100% yes, it is.
All right, so and thank you for that. That was very comprehensive. So let's try to drill down into some of that. Uh, I can hear some people say, but hasn't a lot of that always been the case? Haven't
Mhm.
newspapers, for example, especially in maybe smaller communities, always caved in to pressure from commercial advertisers? Haven't television networks always been overly perhaps cognizant of running afoul in this country of the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC? I'm old enough to remember the Nixon administration, unfortunately. And certainly the press was under lots of attack by then President Nixon and his administration. So what's changed?
I mean you're right. That is 100% true. Because it turns out that the free press is a bit more precarious than I think we imagined it was. So one thing that's changed is all of these attacks are happening at the same time, right? That's one thing that's
Hmm.
changed is there is a concerted effort as opposed to maybe a random occasional effort. So that's one thing. The other thing that's changed, I think, is the I mean, any society has a group of very powerful people, and the people who own newspapers and televisions are in that group, right? They have always
Hmm.
been part of that. Um, it's never been as obvious as it is now that you need a class of publishers who has a fair amount of courage in
Hmm.
order to do good journalism. And you look back to these historic moments in the United States when, like the Pentagon Papers, right? So the Pentagon Papers, there was a court order to stop publishing. And the court order was against one news organization. And so then they handed off their stories to another news organization, right? There was, there were publishers with courage who were lining up in order to publish that story, right? So there was a group of publishers who really believed in the First Amendment.
And
Um,
let me just interrupt so that people understand what we're talking about in terms of history. I primarily, when we're talking about the Pentagon Papers, right, we're talking about the Washington Post and the New York Times, right?
And the
To,
St. Louis
to
Post
larger.
Dispatch, and I
Yes.
mean
Okay.
there
Yeah.
were a whole bunch of other because they both ended up um, getting court orders to stop
Right.
publishing, right? It's
I'm a New Yorker by 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 uh, by birth and upbringing, so I guess I zero in on the New York Times. But yes, you're right.
right. But the thing is there were so first of all there were more owners.
Yeah.
And second of all, those owners didn't seem to have as much to lose, right? Like they could lose a court case, right? They could
Hmm.
become part of the injunction. And then they would have to pay legal fees. But there wasn't a threat to their livelihood in the way that many owners right now, especially broadcasters, are perceiving a threat to their livelihood. Now, some of this is, you know, livelihood in a big corporation
Hmm.
requires the ability to acquire other organizations and merge, and those all require not FCC approval, but FTC approval,
Federal
right?
Trade Commission. Yeah.
Right. And so, which also can, so in that case, right, it's not even like, do you think this story should get out? It's that, are you going to risk this more significant financial penalty that you might have to pay? There's a spirit of retribution now
Mm.
that there was not, that did not previously exist. So that I think the level of retribution that members of the press are perceiving right now is new.
I brought up Richard Nixon, so let me try to make this comparison, or actually ask you to address the comparison. So let's take the Nixon era when he had his enemies list, and reporters were very challenging of him, which he did not like. I worked for a little bit with Dan Rather, and Dan was always very proud of his confrontations at news conferences with Richard Nixon. Um, but can you compare perhaps that struggle between the press and the Nixon administration and President Nixon, and the current situation involving the press and President Donald Trump? How does it differ?
Yeah. So I was in first grade when the Nixon administration came into office for its second term. So
Good for you.
I, I can't make a direct comparison,
No, no,
but
but you know what I'm saying. I mean, there was this tension between Nixon and the press, and he did not like the press. He did not like,
he didn't.
no, and he didn't like reporting that was negative about either him or his policies. And, he did give instructions to people in his administration to shut reporters out and to look into their, tax records and things like that. So if you scratch out the name Nixon and you insert the name Donald Trump, how does it differ? Does it differ by degree?
I mean, I think President Trump has way more levers to pull than
Mm,
President Nixon did. Right? And maybe it's possible that all those levers were available to Nixon, but he didn't have the bandwidth to pull them all at the same
mm,
time. And President Trump did. So maybe it is degree or volume, but you have the number of lawsuits, right? Just,
yeah.
and the crazy dollar figures that are attached to those lawsuits, right? He can file those left and right. Many of them get dismissed, and then he files them again, right? And so that's one lever. You have the regulatory commissions, both the FCC and the FTC, and they have signaled that they are willing to do his bidding, right? So in the past, those were largely independent commissions. But
Hmm.
one of the things that President Trump has been able to do is get rid of the bipartisan nature of the commissioners and replace them with people who are fully loyal to him. So there was a level of checks and balances that President Trump has erased, that President Nixon did not try to erase, right?
You mentioned in passing lawsuits, and I do think that that is a key difference between now and not just Nixon, but almost any past president, which is the Trump. I was going to say Trump administration. It's really Donald Trump. Let's just call it what it is. It's
I mean, he
Donald.
has a lot of people working with him.
Yeah, but it's Donald Trump's inclination to reach for the lawsuit as a weapon to sue people. Uh, I don't think really with the expectation of winning, but to force somebody to defend themselves, which is a very expensive thing in this country to defend yourself against a lawsuit, especially if it's brought by somebody with an awful lot of money. And uh, that does seem to be something to me anyway that's different. That the president doesn't like something, or he thinks that he's been defamed in some way, shape, or form. So what does he do instead of maybe saying something nasty in a private email message to that anchor or reporter? He goes right to the lawsuit and he sues for millions and sometimes even ridiculous
Billion.
figures, billions, right?
Yeah,
Billions
billions.
of dollars. Um, that has got to have a chilling effect, not just on individual journalists, but on the organizations they work for, I would imagine, because of what I just said, the enormous cost of defending oneself against these lawsuits. Am I right about that?
I mean, you are not wrong, right? But I
Okay.
don't know that that's the main intimidation tactic right now. So
Uh-huh. Okay.
the way the lawsuits work is two or three ways, right? So one way
Hmm.
is he files a lawsuit and the organization settles with him,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which you saw with ABC, and I think CBS also settled one with him.
Yes. Yeah, they did.
Um, right? And so that is the journalists who work for those organizations would tell you that they're not going to do anything different
Mm.
as a result of their bosses settling a lawsuit, and that what
Do you
they
believe that?
understand.
But do you believe that?
Well, I believe that from the journalists, it's possible that the system that supports them could get a little bit harder for them to
Yeah.
navigate, right? But um, what happens is though is that the bosses will say, well, this is just a financial, right? This is a calculation that we're making.
Hmm.
It's not going to change how we're covering the president. And it's really hard from a distance to tell, right? I
Hmm.
mean, you can
Right.
judge the quality of the journalism that they do and the types of stories that they do, um, and whether they are critical of the administration. The other way that the lawsuits work is when you fight them, right? Which is you spend a lot of money, you
Yeah.
spend a lot of resources, right? It takes people to, you get a notification that you have to preserve a bunch of evidence, and you have to make sure that evidence is preserved, even if you successfully fight it ever getting to the other side, you still have to like legitimately put all the human resources into making sure that evidence is preserved. And so it does sort of gum up the works, right? And
Hmm.
it takes, in addition to the financial resources, it takes a lot of human resources. So that's sort of the way the lawsuits work. And I said that there's a third one, right? The third one is the threat of a lawsuit, right? The lawsuit
Hmm.
isn't exactly filed, but it's sort of looming over your head.
Yeah.
And then, you wonder the way the chilling effect works in that case is as a journalist, when you've got what you believe to be a very good story, but not a great story,
Mm.
right? Like
Hmm.
every journalist is choosing between, I don't know, 10 different stories that they could do on any given day. If one of those stories is a pretty good story, but it's likely to attract the type of attention that would cause the president to file a lawsuit or threaten to file a lawsuit. And nine of those stories are not like that.
Hmm.
You go through this calculation in your head about what story you're going to do, right? That's how the chilling effect works, is it's almost a level of self-censorship. And as a journalist, what you need is an organization telling you, do the story about the president, right? Like you need an apparatus behind you because it's really hard to even monitor those that level of self-censorship in your head. But the lawsuits are not the bigger. I think the bigger problem are the search warrants in the criminal arrests, right? Those.
I'm gonna stop you there for a second because Kelly, that is exactly where I wanted to go now.
Mhm.
That
Okay.
that yes, there is the economic threat, the lawsuit, but then very recently, for those of you who are watching and may or may not be familiar with this story, um, there was a protest, and correct me, Kelly, if I have any of these facts wrong. There was a protest against ICE, which is the organization in the United States that has been going after those who are in the country illegally, or at least ostensibly. That is what they're supposed to be doing, although unfortunately, as has been the case, sometimes they have been picking up people who are very much U.S. citizens, and it also led, unfortunately, to two very tragic deaths in the state of Minnesota. So there was this protest at a church, and the church's pastor also happens to be a high up. I'm not sure if he ran the ICE operation in Minneapolis or is a high up official, but in any event, that was the reason why protesters went into this particular church to, in effect, say to the pastor, how can you be a man of God and at the same time be overseeing, supervising an operation in Minneapolis that is very disturbing to the citizens and has also led to the death of, as I mentioned, two people. So far, so good. Now enter a former colleague of mine at CNN, Don Lemon, who was an anchor at CNN, is now an independent journalist and does a YouTube podcast, a daily one. And he goes in with the group and interviews people. He interviews the protesters. He interviews or tries to interview, I don't remember, the pastor. In any event, he functions as any journalist would in trying to understand what is happening with this group. Kelly, take it from there.
So, a couple of things happened, right? So, um, the group goes into the church to disrupt the service,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And there are a couple of journalists with them. Don Lemon is one. Another freelance journalist named Georgia Fort.
Hmm.
Um, the Department of Justice went to several judges to get arrest warrants for both the protesters and the journalists. And the first couple rounds of judges agreed to issue arrest warrants for a handful of the organizers, but not all of them, because the charges are conspiracy to deprive someone of their religious freedom,
Hmm.
so a freedom protected by the First Amendment of the United States. So this is a law that had previously been used against the KKK when they lit fires and attacked synagogues. And I'm sorry, lit fires when they lit crosses on fire and
Yeah.
attacked synagogues, right when they were trying to intimidate people. Um, and so the first couple of judges say, we don't see evidence. You have presented no evidence that these journalists were part of the conspiracy, right? That they were part of the organizing of this. And so, after getting told no by a couple of judges, the Department of Justice takes it to a grand jury, and they get the arrest warrants there. And then they go and arrest these journalists, and they do the arrests in a way that is meant to be um, sort of maximum effect, maximum humiliation, right? So Don Lemon, by the time that this arrest warrant is issued, is in Los Angeles to cover the Grammys, and they go and arrest him at his hotel, and they make a big show of it. Yeah, and they do it on a Friday,
Mm.
right? So the point is with all of this, and then there is an additional case, right, completely separate, where the FBI and the Department of Justice get a search warrant for a reporter's home, and they go and seize all of her equipment, her phone, her computers,
This
her
is the
garment.
Washington Post now, right? I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Washington Post journalist. And this is
Yeah.
a journalist who has specialized in telling the stories of federal workers who have been so impacted by this administration and has had many, many, many anonymous sources to help her understand what's going on with the federal workforce. And she had just written a column talking about I don't know, like 1,000 anonymous sources that she's been working with. So, first of all, in the past, when a journalist when anybody really who is not considered a significant threat to society or flight risk is when an arrest warrant is issued, it oftentimes comes in the form of a summons, right? So they send the note to your lawyer and they're like, hey, you have to show up at this jail at this time to be arrested and processed. Right? That's how Donald Trump was arrested, right?
Right.
That is how most arrests happen. Similarly, when you look at the Washington Post case, when the federal government, any law enforcement agency feels like they have a right to information that is in a reporter's possession, because of the previous case law that stems from the First Amendment and protections from a free press, there is rather than issuing a search warrant, which is where the cops show up, tear your house apart looking for anything that they can, right? That is a blunt instrument legally. Um, and it's usually used when they're looking for like serious evidence of criminal activity. Um, when they're going after journalists, they often issue a subpoena, which they send to your lawyer, and your lawyer has the opportunity to do a couple of things. One is to go to a judge and say, I think this subpoena should be quashed because of all this case law.
Mhm.
Secondly, if that isn't successful, to say, okay, we think that you should limit the scope of what you can get to. So no, you don't get to like just look in this reporter's notebook or computer or phone, but instead you have to tell us precisely what you're looking for and we will turn it over to you. Right? That is traditionally how the relationship between law enforcement and the press has operated because even though they're not always in total agreement. They are both in support of democracy. Now there is this war between law enforcement and journalists, at least federal law enforcement and journalists, where they are using the types of tools that say to journalists, we don't think that you are a democratic institution and we are going to try and attack you. That is that signal is more intimidating and threatening to journalists because one, not every journalist works for an organization that can even defend them,
Mhm.
um, has the resources, a First Amendment attorney on speed dial.
Right.
Um, and second, um, it's sort of like putting the frontline journalists. It's sort of like taking prisoners of war, right? Like
Mhm.
like these frontline journalists now are just becoming collateral in a political agenda as opposed to a set of checks and balances, right? The
Mhm.
press was envisioned properly as the fourth estate, right? The check on power and to weaken the press in all of these different ways, but particularly with the criminal prosecutions and the search warrants, that actually stands to have a much more significant chilling effect than the lawsuits or the regulatory retaliation, I think.
Are we now at a sort of a somewhat unique inflection point for the media in this country for two reasons? One, the political reasons that we've now talked about for quite some time, and in particular involving the current administration, the Trump administration. But also, we're at an economic time, are we not, where the landscape has dramatically changed for media. And so I'm talking about everything from the recent layoffs, and I think it's fair to say mass layoffs at the Washington Post, some, I think, 300 personnel reporters and other editorial workers at the Washington Post. Network television network news, ABC, NBC, CBS, you name it. None of them are doing particularly well, no matter who's number one or number two or number three. The pie has considerably gotten smaller over the past couple of decades. Many communities, as you know, Kelly, in this country no longer even have a local newspaper with reporters who are trained to go and evaluate things like, the school board, or I think, correct me if I'm wrong, weren't you at one point a police reporter? Didn't you do some of that stuff? Okay.
Mhm.
But a lot of communities no longer have anybody who can look at police records and find out if the police department in their town is doing the right thing or not doing the right thing. So it seems to me, and again, tell me if you agree or not, that we have these events that have now collided. A landscape where the press has been decimated, and I'm talking about electronic as well as good old-fashioned print, and at a time when you have a political administration that to say is hostile to the press would be an understatement.
No, I mean, I don't want to say you're wrong.
No, no. If
Um,
you think I'm, go
but
ahead and say it. I'm
I
wrong about
mean,
a lot of things. So go
so
ahead.
we are definitely at an inflection point for democracy, right? Like
Okay.
we are seeing many of our democratic institutions come under attack right now.
Yeah.
Um, and the press is among them. And then you have this other narrative for the press. But the evolution for the professional press in the United States, as well as frankly around the world, is a long running um progressive narrative, right? Like
Mhm.
so first you see like sort of standard changes, right? Like so if you want to go back like a century, you see the rise of newspapers and then radio and then television and everybody thinks newspapers are going to die and everybody thinks radio is going to die and it doesn't. They evolve and they change. You see the rise and fall of magazines. And so right now you are looking at an absolute evolution in the way news consumers get their information, which changes the economic way that journalism is created. Right. And so all these things that you said are true, and especially for broadcast, right?
Mm.
Broadcast is just about to fly off a cliff, right, in terms of
Yeah.
audience. And and but things come up and things replace it. So the New York Times is stronger than ever, right?
Because
Like
they're
they
digital subscriptions you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they found an economic model that will work for them, right? So because of their digital subscriptions, and their digital subscriptions are strong because they put a lot of money into building an app and maintaining an app and making the experience for the consumer really strong. And they also added a bunch of stuff like cooking and games, and they bought a sports company, right? And like so,
Mhm.
and they bought they've got Wirecutter, right? Like so they have a number of they sort of figured out on a national or international level what the economic model looked like. They put the money in the right places in terms of investment, and they have created a sustainable business, a really, really strong business model.
Yeah,
And they continue,
but that's only one newspaper, just one.
right. Well, but the thing is right, but the point is that it can be done, right?
Yes.
The
Okay.
second thing is, right? And so then you have what's happening locally, right? So yes, you have seen the absolute decimation of newspapers and all of the journalists that they used to support. But you are seeing a couple of other things happen. Already, public media was expanding its role in local journalism, right? Most public media newsrooms were building larger and larger reporting staffs. And they were sort of backfilling some of that. The other thing that's been happening on the local level is nonprofit journalism. Now, it's not a magic silver bullet, right? But but it is an alternative that is evolving, right? So you're seeing the press, if you want to take the press as a whole, and I really struggle with this because it's so big and it's so
Hmm.
many different things. There is a there is an evolution that's happening with the press. And while that evolution is unfolding, there is an inflection point in democracy where if the press were stronger, you might see less of the what do you
Well,
call it when you acquiesce? The act of acquiescing. You would see less of the act of acquiescing. Um,
how about putting it this way? Less kissing of someone's backside.
there you go. There you
Okay.
go. But the thing is you still have, we still have we still have a lot of really good journalism, right? There is like when something happens, and I will just take the shooting of Alex Preddy,
Hmm.
right? Like the killing of Alex Preddy
In Minneapolis, again, for those
in
who may
Minneapolis
not,
by ICE
Minneapolis, right?
agents, by
Right.
federal, or I'm sorry, not by ICE, by Border Patrol
Border
agents.
Patrol, right?
Um, right? The federal agents kill a man, and within minutes, the video, more than one video, is posted to social media. Within hours, there's, I think, three videos that are posted to social media. By midnight that night, right? It happened at 9 a.m. in Minnesota, 10 a.m. on the East Coast. Less than 12 hours. I'm sorry, 14 hours. I can do math. I can. 14 within 14 hours, the Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, I might add,
No.
um, has done a frame by frame analysis that definitively lets the American public know that they are being deceived by their officials who are saying that he brandished a gun. And I've looked at all of those press conferences from Gregory Bovino and Kristi Noem to Department of Homeland Security officials. And their language is so incredibly careful that you realize once you see the Wall Street Journal video that they knew exactly what they were doing. It's not like they were misinformed, right? It's
Right.
pretty clear that when they looked at what happened, they questioned whether they could justify it. And so they came up with the most careful language that they could to not be outright lying. So they said stuff like he had a gun, he approached officials with a gun, he brandished a gun. But what the Wall Street Journal breakdown frame by frame showed was that he was um, he was attacked by the agents.
Right. He
They
was
took
holding
a
a
gun.
phone in one hand and
He had a
his
phone
gun
in
was in
one
his right
hand
hand. Yeah.
while they were subduing him, and they had him on the ground face down, six or seven agents. Someone pulled a gun out of his waistband, yelled gun, 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 and ran away from the scrum. And another agent pulled out his gun and shot him in the back,
And we
right?
should
Like,
and we should point. Let me also point out because it's important for people who may
mhm.
not quite understand, especially if they're watching outside of the country and thinking, "Well, how come this guy had a gun to begin with?" In the United States, some states and Massachusetts, Minnesota, of which, of course, Minneapolis is a large city is a state that does allow citizens to carry a gun, either concealed or not concealed, so long as it's legally acquired and licensed. And in the case of the gentleman who was shot, he was licensed to carry this gun. So sorry, I just wanted to
And
get that in.
and that is something that we also believe in as Americans, right? Like it is, people argue about the Second Amendment and how it is to be interpreted, but that is the amendment that in our U.S. Constitution that that all of the gun ownership laws are built on. And many people will say you need your Second Amendment rights to protect your First Amendment rights. And that played out in that case, right? That like he was absolutely within his rights, and there are many people who are defending his right to have that
Right.
gun at that moment in the situation that he had it in.
You brought up
So, but
something
let's go
that
back.
oh,
Wait,
okay,
wait,
go
wait,
ahead.
wait, wait, though. I want to
No, go
go
ahead.
back to your point, right? Because your
Yeah.
point was that like journalism is really weak. I don't think journalism is really weak. I think it is vulnerable. But there is a lot of very strong, courageous journalism happening. The journalism that's happening in Minneapolis right now, right? You have
Hmm.
the Minneapolis Star Tribune, you have the St. Paul Pioneer Press, right? Two
Hmm.
newspapers. You also have MPR, Minnesota Public Radio, a really, really strong public media organization. You have all of the television stations. You have several nonprofits, including the Min Post. And then you also have a nonprofit that sprang up recently, and God, I'm going to forget the name of them, to tell stories by immigrants for immigrants. So there is a lot of really quality journalism happening that is essentially acting as the forefathers envisioned, which is a check on the government. And
Okay.
so, you know,
Fair. No, it's fair points.
yeah, like I just want, I mean, I want people to know that like American journalists are out there kicking ass and taking names, and they're doing it under very difficult circumstances.
You mentioned something in passing. I wasn't going to go down this road, but I think we should briefly. And that is because you had mentioned that within a very short amount of time of the shootings, both of the shootings in Minneapolis, that there were videos taken by people that could be seen, on various social media platforms. But therein lies another distinction between now and, a couple of decades ago. There was a time when if you saw a video on the, ABC World News Tonight or CBS Evening News, that video you could be pretty sure was legit. It was vetted by professionals. It was, all the different angles were looked at before it made that broadcast. Now, when you see all those videos, how do you know it's real?
Well, I think that's why you need a trusted authenticator, right? The role of journalist, it used to be to get to the scene and get the video or to get
Yeah.
the audio or to get some documentation. Now the role of journalists is to verify, right? And so there are people who specialize in video forensics. Um, and I think citizens, we have a whole division at the Poynter Institute called MediaWise, and this is what they do, is they help citizens figure out how to tell if the information that they're getting is a fact, if it's authentic, and if it's in context, right? So as a citizen, there are a bunch of things that you can do. One is go to trusted sources, right? Figure out who your trusted sources are and go to them. And if you rely on sources that come at you from a political point of view, which
Hmm.
is fine. Um, but if you do that, then what you're going to want to do is look at how they're talking about a piece of evidence over time. And if they start to change the way that they're talking about it, then you should understand that there may be somebody else out there who could explain the facts about a certain piece of video. But it is very confusing. I mean, on top of that, um, there are individuals that are making fake videos using
Hmm.
AI.
Yeah.
But our government is also putting out um, altered images
Well, the
to
White House, yeah. I mean, which is
support their narrative.
amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is amazing. It is absolutely amazing that there is a law that our government is not allowed to use propaganda on its own citizens. Um,
Doesn't seem to be working, that law.
I'm not sure who can challenge that law or even what the definition of propaganda is
Well,
because it's previously,
wouldn't it be the Trump Department of Justice?
well,
Wouldn't
it's previously been used for like Radio Free Europe kind of things,
Yeah.
right? Like places where we put information out into another country to try and sway those citizens. Um, but yeah, I mean, th there's a lot of really great journalism happening to try and keep the American public informed. And for the most part, I don't know that anybody is confused about what happened with Alex Preddy. Even people who support the administration
Hmm.
challenging them on this particular shooting, right? And it's because of the journalism.
Kelly McBride, Senior Vice President at the Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
taking
thanks for
time
having me.
to be with us. I enjoyed the conversation. For those of you watching again, we thank you for participating in our every 2-week journey to try to find out what the hell is going on in this country at this particular point in time. We, as always, welcome your comments. If you would like to subscribe, it is free, so by all means do so. Until the next episode of SOS America, I'm Charles Feldman. Thank you.